On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Kevin Dotzenrod. He is the Vice President of Engineering at Total Expert. We're going to be talking about actually an interesting topic that's come up and I haven't covered it yet, and that is in confidence. Confidence is king, and dealing with imposter syndrome as a manager is becoming more of a challenge now that people are remote for the most part. Lots of different factors. We're going to be talking about Kevin and his views. There is no right and wrong answer, but how Kevin is tackling this and dealing with this will hopefully help everyone out there. Kevin, thank you for coming on and sharing.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Let's start off at the top and get to know what Total Expert does, if you could tell us that. And also, as the VP of Engineering, what are some of your responsibilities?
Sure. Yeah. So Total Expert is a marketing automation platform. So we have a custom-built CRM specifically for the financial services industry and those verticals. So this kind of brings together all the CRM capabilities with all the automation capabilities, and data insights is kind of our primary focus.
Cool.
And as far as my team, I have quality assurance and software engineering here at Total Expert. So we have a group of about 75 in there. So a nice, good-sized team.
There you go. All right. So I think this is a super important topic. We don't deal with the mental health side as much as we should. I think this is a good topic. It's actually a few people have asked for an episode around this, so I was really glad when you and I chatted that this would be the topic we're speaking about. And really, we're talking about, at work, obviously, people need to be, feel happy, healthy, motivated, feel confident in themselves. And it's not just, for somebody who's starting off new, but somebody existing on the team. There's a lot of different dynamics. But maybe let's start at the top level, right? So let's maybe talk about what imposter syndrome is, and we'll kind of use that as our, launching point.
Sure. Yeah, I guess, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I guess I play one at work from time to time.
There we go.
For me, it's people feeling like they're faking it. They're really not at the level they're in, and just all kind of the internal conflict and confidence struggles that kind of come along with that kind of broad topic. I guess is how I look at it.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, obviously, neither one of us are mental health professionals. We're interpreting it best we can. So, to get official, medical advice, certainly not in this show. And if you want to look up imposter syndrome for full detail, that's probably where you go. But I agree with you. That's kind of how I, as a layperson, view it when it comes to people at work. And I guess the challenge is, you have to be able to help identify somebody who doesn't feel confident, right? Somebody who feels like they need to pretend that they know what they're doing. And typically, once you start finding out, if you find out late, a lot of things are have already gone wrong. I guess as a manager, and you've been a manager, for a while, are there any ways that you have learned to kind of help identify someone who might be going through this?
Yeah, I think observations and kind of how they handle themselves in meeting situations, and just take a quick step back. I think the remote world we've kind of grown accustomed to here over COVID has made a lot of the normal telltale signs, I think, a little bit harder to pick up on. You don't have that, walking across the office and kind of picking up on the kind of gestures, mannerisms. So for me, it's really pivoted more to our world of Zoom and trying to see things there. And really, it's up to the kind of the direct manager, I think, a lot. I do skip levels with a series of engineers, but that's not happening on a weekly basis. But it's those personal conversations, I think, is kind of the best way to really start diving into it. But I do think it starts with just observing how people interact in group discussions, even sprint planning and how they participate in some of that, and how they may be hesitating or holding back, especially when they know the answer to a thing. So I think it really is just trying to be aware of and picking up on all the different signals that a person may be displaying.
Absolutely. And I guess we could maybe even talk about two distinct situations, right? So one is someone who's new to the company. We don't have a baseline of this person. They're coming in, even if they're coming in as a, just an entry level person, let alone somebody hired into management, there's lots of expectation. There's a lot of, energy when that person's starting. They want to, go crush it and look good in front of their manager. And sometimes maybe they start saying yes to stuff just because they want to, they want to portray themselves as someone who's a go-getter. Is that a risk for people who join a company and are new to a team?
Yeah, I know. I guess, especially at the entry level engineer, and this is just my opinion, I think being as fearless as possible is great because you're, no one expects you to know a lot of the things. So throwing out ideas and just kind of diving, face first into things is just, I think, just the fastest way to learn. If you can paralyze yourself by just thinking about, am I doing this right? Am I, kind of that self introspection on how you approach a problem. So I think that tends, and I think that's why, at least in my case, you see the imposter syndrome more with more of the senior, honestly, the mid to senior levels than you do, because I think there's a more level playing field. Like, we'll regularly hire entry-level engineers in groups too. So they have kind of a natural buddy system, whereas an individual new to an organization with maybe a stellar background, but in a different tech stack or whatever, all these things make them a little bit second-guess themselves, especially because they know as a senior engineer, there's a feeling I should know everything, or I should know how this works. And then again, you take that and combine that with the remote collaboration environment we're in now. You don't have that hallway conversation, roll your chair up to the next person and ask a question. So I think it can make it even harder for people to or for them to either experience that or overcome it.
Yeah, I mean, that 100% makes sense. And I was actually thinking about people who are promoted into management, because it's almost like a whole new, it's a whole new area. If you've never been a manager, especially first-time managers, and we talked about people who joined or move into senior roles or are hired into senior roles. It's their first experience, but at least they've done the job for a while. Sometimes you have people that, obviously were tech leads, but now have to be full people managers, and they have a lot of responsibility. Conceptually, how do you run one-on-ones? Their job is now to, be able to identify the person who might not be contributing or might need help, and they've never done it. I guess when you're looking at, your managers and maybe previous work with managers, how do you make sure that management layer is especially first-time managers are properly supported so that they don't feel like they have to fake knowing what it takes to be a manager?
Yeah, I think a couple. I think finding other managers that are maybe not, haven't been it for years and years, but are more recent, but have kind of gotten to their confidence point or where they feel comfortable role is a good to set up just as a kind of a buddy that they can bounce questions off. They don't, report directly to them. They can kind of story tell and go through scenarios together is one important aspect. And the other is what I always tell anyone that is moving into a leadership position is to build your brand on your strengths. Don't emulate. I think that's where a lot of people can struggle and again, with that imposter syndrome piece where they're not only emulating, but they're comparing to how another leader does it. Whereas I always use the analogy of, the old video game where you have X points that you can use, some on speed, some on strength, and all this and it's better to spike on where your strengths are and use that to guide how you would lead. And I think that it's just more authentic, it's more genuine, and you really are playing your strengths. You're not over indexing on your opportunities and kind of gaps. Of course, you want to grow as a leader and individual as well, but it allows you, I think, to kind of get out of the gates more confidently because you're going off of you're leading by what your true strengths are, to be your true strengths. So I think that's an important thing is just not emulating someone else, even if you respect them. It's great to ask their questions, but it's an individual sport being a leader, and you should really just take advantage of all everything that's gotten you to the point and made you ready to be promoted to that position as well.
Yeah, it's actually super interesting because I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to first-time managers, you try to maybe identify someone who was a good manager and all the one-on-ones you've gone through and all the different ways somebody's communicate with you, and you're like, hey, this is what it takes to be a manager. And if you're lucky, you've had really good managers and you have some good data points to draw on, from previous experiences. But if you haven't had great experiences to draw on, you're kind of left figuring things out on your own. I guess this person, if especially let's say we're talking about first time manager in this case, when they're being promoted into that manager, what should we be doing? Or I guess even better question maybe is, in general, when we have a first time manager, knowing that we don't want them to emulate and we don't know what their previous experiences are, what can we do to support them so they don't feel like, they have to pretend they know the role?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is having a strong relationship with that person, so that and that's really on you to make sure they feel comfortable and there's a layer of trust there, and so they can actually ask questions that maybe they wouldn't be more comfortable otherwise asking. And as well as really being good about well-rounded feedback with them. I think you're going to be off to a bad situation if all you do is nitpick on what they could do differently. So really trying to come in and really, not the compliment sandwich kind of thing, but really being cognizant of making sure that you're reinforcing the great things they're doing, as well as calling out things. I think it helps to do it more in a question like, hey, I saw you did this way. Why was that? Instead of immediately going to, you did that wrong, because you made from their explanation. So I think it's a better way, and to also kind of build that relationship and make it bi-directional, not telling them what to do. Because I don't think anyone really has the answer, right? Anyway, so as much as you can be there and be empathetic to what they're going through, and I think anyone that's moved into leadership, especially in technology, where it's a different way. It's harder to be in, because you went from what made you amazing as an engineer is not necessarily going to translate to this next level. And that can be different, right? And how you judge yourself, even, like, it's not what you got done, how many stories or what code you deployed. It's a different way of even judging yourself, which already out of the gates makes it a little more difficult to even find your kind of place there, and really make sure you're judging yourself based on how you're force multiplying in the team and that. So it's already hard in that respect, because it's just not as data driven and easy to see your accomplishments as later. So really, I think it all starts with empathy and relationships. But I think as well with that, anytime that you're trying to be empathetic, there also has to be an accountability piece. So you don't want everything to be a crutch. So it's really the balance of empathy with accountability.
That's interesting. I guess that's a very good point. Of as the IC of the role, you hone your craft. You get really good at it, and you know how to judge yourself. You know how to know when you need to kick it in gear and know not. You come to this management layer. It's a brand new job. It's not like you can go back to college for 4 years and ramp up and learn those skills. It's, hey, next day, next week, start doing this. And if you're kind of looking at someone before they get to that position, and this is somebody, I guess, who's on the team, what can you start doing ahead of time, right? So hopefully we can avoid imposter syndrome. Like, the easiest way to alleviate it is make sure that someone who's starting feels confident, feels like they have the skills, they've been provided the necessary ability to succeed. Like, what can we be proactive with to just nip it in the bud and not have this actually be a core of somebody's issue?
Yeah, I think finding areas for them to lead. I use lead in this case pretty generally, but like, one of the hardest things as any leader at any level really is kind of having responsibility without mandate, right? So that you know what needs to be done, but you're not necessarily going to have the mandate to say, I can get this team to do X for me and this team to do Y for me. So any case you can put say engineers, specifically in our case, in a position to lead cross-team efforts over here, or a lot of times, coming from the ideas about how we should maybe changing our coding standards in some way, of kind of leading these grassroots efforts across teams is a great way for them to start getting comfortable, kind of working outside of their comfort zone, both in kind of what they're working on, as well as the people they're working with on that. And again, that not having to be their boss or have permission from their boss to do those things, I think is a great way for them just to kind of see if leadership's even right, right? And I think that'll start making them think anyways, as they're successful in these areas and they get called out by other teams for the great work, is a great way to kind of help start building that way of thinking, and push into that next level if that's their choice.
Absolutely. I guess as a manager of managers, you're helping people who are trying to manage their individual teams of IC people. How much effort You were joking that you were a part psychologist hat as well. I think every manager partially does. But how much of your time is spent trying to understand what makes people tick? Like, what happens when they excel? How do they react to things? Like, how much of your time is spent observing that? Obviously, with Zoom, you get limited time, so it's even a little bit more constrained. But in general, how do you approach that side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much more. I don't know the percentage wise, but it is much higher than I think anyone, especially outside of technology. I'm biased, but I think in our field happens to be some of the most intelligent individuals, and with that we also get a lot of diversity. There's other areas that just don't have the diversity we have. So the idea is that the different mindsets, I think it makes it truly different. This isn't, engineers as truly problem solvers don't want to be told answers. They don't want to be told how to do things in general. So it I think in our case makes it even that much more important to really not have a script of how this is done, but to really change your style for every individual that reports to you. I think you'll get the most out of those people. I think they'll feel much more empowered and really respected because of that as well. So I guess almost day to day, anything from, even from, maybe something that's falling behind. There's always more than face value. It's not just we, underestimated. That could be the case at the point, but there's always other dynamics in place leading to any kind of thing as leaders we deal with on a daily basis. So I think it really is kind of always a thread in our minds, always churning on the why did we get to this point? What made this person make that decision? Are they in a good spot? Are they engaged? Are they all these things which all I think have there's a strong psychological component to all of them.
Absolutely. I guess you're watching people, whether somebody just makes a mistake or continuously you start seeing it happen, not necessarily could be imposter syndrome. So somebody could just be poor at their job as well. You're trying to evaluate that. How long do you wait to start making determinations of when to step in? Like, obviously you want to help people sooner. You want to give people some leeway to go ahead and make some mistakes. You want to be supportive. You mentioned a bi-directional relationship. When you're watching things play out and you need to give people a little bit of, trust and a little bit of slack, how do those parameters get determined? I mean, I know it's not black and white. It's all art, but how do you go about it yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on, and it's not really a reporting structure. It's just the comfort level of interaction. So if it's someone reporting to me directly, as soon as I see it, I won't necessarily call it out, but I will, our next one-on-one, just more dive into how they're doing, how things are going, enjoying, to try to kind of passively bring up the conversation that way. If it's someone reports to me, that I don't want to make it worse by getting involved, because it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's truly from worrying that they're in a good state confidence-wise. So that I would probably, if I see it, I'll probably talk more to their managers. Say, hey, are they doing all right? Are they feeling good about things? And if there's opportunities to do a skip level with them, not that being the main subject of it, I will do so if nothing else, just to just kind of hear how it's going, to see if I'm picking up on more that I should be concerned about. But I like it, and I think it can vary from person to person too. On when's, so I think there's a gut feeling on when's the right time to engage. Because I think if you came in too frontal, in most cases, people could really shy away and actually just make that imposter syndrome even worse, right? Because now even my boss is noticing this. They don't want it to be that. It's really about how can we help you? And I think it's interesting about imposter syndrome is the normal compliment someone and tell them great job. In that case, it actually can make it much worse, because now you're fueling that imposter syndrome by giving them compliments on things they don't necessarily agree with. So it is. It's tricky. It really is.
Yeah, it's actually true. I mean, I think you do run the risk of accidental success potentially for someone who's trying to figure the job out, and when they're successful, and they're trying to figure out what led to that success so they could reproduce it. Because obviously when you fail, it's easy to go, well, this is what made me fail, I got to go fix that. But when you're actually successful, then you have to go back if you're not 100% sure. And I think this applies to a lot of people. If you can't reproduce have a successful process to be able to identify what's working, it is hard to later rely on your own strengths because you're still kind of guessing, what those parameters were. I guess from your experience, when you're looking at people who've come in, obviously going through the interview process and you're understanding the previous experiences they had and the type of learning, the ways people learn, right, and how they actually can, ramp up and onboard. Is there a notion of maybe customizing, onboarding per person? I know you depending, you mentioned cohorts of entry level people, that makes sense. And then, obviously every person has a different learning style. It's not easy for bigger companies, but for a smaller company, should they really be trying to hone in on like how to best ramp up somebody the way they learn the best?
I think that's absolutely the case. And I don't know if it even matters size of company.
Yeah, it's fair.
But yeah, I think it's more work that way. But and it's not like you have to custom tailor and complete onboarding. But I think, most important. I remember back at a previous place I was at, watching an engineer that was really struggling, being explained something by a principal engineer. And afterwards, I knew the person from the interview, and their skill set was like, there's something else here. And I said, well, why don't you try? You just did verbal. They may be better visual learner. So can you try to add the visual peak components to it to see, or written to see, because everyone learns differently, and some people index much differently in the different means of learning. And then ended up being it. Like visual was the way this engineer. So I think that's why it's important to understand how people learn as well, not just in leaders, but in engineers that happen to be more, at a leadership level, be it a principal engineer or lead engineer, is to be cognizant and pick up on those and make sure you're offering, if not a custom tailored way, you're offering all mediums of learning to happen, not just what you happen to be most comfortable with.
That's interesting. I think it took me a while to learn how I learn best. I just grew up assuming however way a teacher or somebody, a mentor taught was the way I had to learn from them. It didn't dawn on me, well, I just don't learn that way. And I realized that I'm not a very good auditory listener to learn. I need to see it, whether it's a video or I read it. Once I read it, then I've got it nailed down. And sometimes I look back on jobs, and you just mentioned it, and I was like, you know what? I they gave me the onboarding in an auditory way. I sit down and explain, here's systems, and I go away and I'd be like, well, now I need to dive in myself. And I felt like I had to do double the amount of work to ramp up when I could have just been given something to just go read a manual. Not that you can put everything in a manual, but you know what I mean? It's interesting that how we start learning how we learn, we can actually go into a job and tell people, you know what, by the way, I learn best this way, and actually have the company, whether it's the engineering ramp up on, the code base or whatever the processes are internal, and be like, hey, this is going to help you more because this is the way you're going to learn faster.
Yeah. And you wonder too, again, with the Zoom culture, like it's so auditory now. Like how is that also affecting? And then online market boarding tools are by and large terrible. So are we even making it much more difficult for people that learn in other ways too? So yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, even with the podcast, honestly, I try to have notes coming into it. I try to annotate my notes as we're talking so that I know what we've covered, where we could go. Because when I start seeing that, my mind starts plating much better. If I were just to sit here and talk without that little cheat sheet, I actually feel like I'd be grasping a question to trying to figure out where to take conversation. And obviously, when you're in a Zoom with multiple people, and it's not controlled like it is for this experience of a podcast, it's rather different. I think you're right. The Zoom culture has changed the way we all can sense these different things. And I guess to maybe touch on that one point, when it comes to Zoom, you mentioned you can't pull up the chair, you can't can't hear somebody talking about something. Safe spaces is something that I've talked about in the past on the podcast, but safe spaces is really important because you need to have somebody who is struggling, be able to not just be spotted, but maybe have an opportunity. And one-on-ones are a good option, area, but safe space creation, are you seeing that as a more integral part of your management process, the culture, to make sure people can reach out and feel like, they can have your time like that anytime they need?
Yes, yeah, I always make it a genuine thing. I always say at the end of is reach out anytime. I'm always available on Slack, whatever. But also with that, you have to be that person. I have to be responsive, which is important. So but that is a key. And I think to your point about that, one thing I've done, and I think I've done much more over the last few years with this environment, was almost using asynchronous guide. So Slack, for instance, to like, hey, I think you know the answer to this, and also kind of helping bring that person in conversation, right? By then they don't have to jump in or interrupt, or if they're not quite there, but I can come in and say, hey, you know what? I think Charlie had a thought on this. We were talking the other day about this. Charlie, what were you telling me about again? Just finding ways to kind of bring them in a casual, safe way into the conversation, because now it's just answering a question. I'm not interjecting my idea. So, and that's just one thing I do. I mean, there's 1,000 different little ways, but I think there's a whole bunch of little things you can do to kind of help bring people in those conversations, and like I said, in a not put on the spot type of way, and even then, if they may say no, I don't want to talk about it, I'm like, well, it's fine, maybe next time, kind of thing. But I think there's a bunch of little things we can all do as leaders to kind of help make sure we're bringing everyone, because I mean that's how you develop a culture of meritocracy is ideas and diversity and ideas across, and you're missing out if you're not finding ways to bring people into the fold on that.
Absolutely. Kevin, I love the conversation. I think when I mention management's more art than science, I really am saying it's a lot of psychology that takes place of art, but it's definitely an interesting area. I think Zoom and imposter syndrome is probably going to be more topics in the future as we start figuring out how to deal with it even more. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing. I think it's been a great conversation. I was going to ask you, if a future guest could answer either a single question or address a topic for you, what would you like to hear about in the future?
And apologies if we've done one on this, but I think one that would resonate with leaders as well as technologists in general is around kind of technology career progression, right? For instance, it doesn't mean that everyone needs to go all the way up to principal engineer but just a discussion on kind of how do I know what's right for me? I think it's more of what makes you happy every day, but just to kind of hit on that whole, just the progression from entry level engineer through, or if you want to cut off into management. I think there's some interesting things about knowing when and how to prepare yourself for those moves, and also not feeling like I need to be, if I'm a happy senior engineer, I don't have to try to move to more of a leadership lead engineer type of position. So anything that's in that area, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, it ties into the topic of dealing with imposter syndrome, because obviously, I think that key word is the preparation. So that when you get there, wherever there is, you're way more comfortable. So I think that's a great topic. And what's a good way for somebody to get a hold of you to just kind of pick your brain on anything you might have said on the podcast at all?
See, I would say old school as I am, I'm not huge on social media, but LinkedIn is probably the best way. Honestly, I can find my profile right on LinkedIn, and I do watch that quite often. So I guess I lied when I said not social media. LinkedIn would be the way.
LinkedIn is it. All right. Well, there we go. We'll definitely make sure we put that in the show notes. Thanks again for being on. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, if the podcast is of use to you, it's interesting, share it. That's how the podcast has been growing. So I appreciate that. Secondly, if somebody wants to come on to talk about career progression and identifying what's right, whether it's the technical track or the managerial track. I mean, I think that's a good dialogue. We constantly need to be talking about that, because I think it's valuable to the audience. Please let me know. Love to have you on, or if you know someone, have that person on. That's it for this episode. Back again. Thank you. Goodbye.